My name is Wendy Pearson, and I am the director here at the Library, Museum, and Archives. And I'm very excited to be welcoming author Ralph White today, who will be talking about his latest book, Getting Out of Saigon, how a 27-year-old banker saved 113 Vietnamese civilians. So Ralph will be talking about this book in conversation with Jim Brooke. A few words about each of our speakers, and then I will turn the program over to them. Ralph White managed branches of the American Express International Banking Corporation in both Okinawa and Vietnam. He served for 17 years at Chase Manhattan Bank, including a decade in Southeast Asia. He served as Senior Vice President in Financial Engineering at Marsh & McLennan Securities. Mr. White received an MBA from Columbia University, and in 2009, he founded the Columbia Fiction Foundry, which is a writing workshop under Columbia University's Office of Alumni and Development. And Getting Out of Saigon is his second book. He will be in conversation today with Jim Brooke. Jim Brooke is a Berkshire native, so we're proud to claim him. He has been the editor-in-chief of the English-language Khmer Times newspaper in Cambodia. He's been the Russia bureau chief for Voice of America, the Moscow bureau chief for Bloomberg, and before Bloomberg, he reported for 24 years for the New York Times in Japan, South Korea, the Ivory Coast, and Brazil. And I don't want to forget that he currently writes a column for our local newspaper, the Berkshire Eagle. Please join me in welcoming Ralph White and Jim Brooke.
Thank you. Great. Great to see a full house here this afternoon on such a sunny day. I thought I'd pass it over to Ralph to kind of sketch out the book, which I have right here. And I had a funny thought. I stopped. My wife works at Lucky Nails, which is a manicure place on the main street of Lee. It's all run by Vietnamese, and I showed it to the boss, JJ, and he said, "My father didn't get the flight out and spent 10 years in a re-education camp." So, what Ralph is talking about, what he did, is very real. So I want to pass the mic over. You have your own mic to Ralph.
Thanks a lot, Jim. First of all, I want to thank Wendy very much for setting this up, and I have a lavalier mic, and the Stockbridge Library for making the space and the time available, and very much to Jim. I'm honored to have Jim moderating today. In April 1975, all of the American companies that had operations in Saigon were in trouble. The North Vietnamese army was sweeping down the country. The war was lost. The Paris Peace Accords had been 2 years earlier. It had been an uneven peace with the North Vietnamese allowed to leave troops in country. The South Vietnamese weren't able to defend themselves, and it was just a matter of time before Saigon fell. It didn't take anybody by surprise except for the ambassador. U.S. Ambassador Martin Graham turned out to be very surprised by all of it. The Chase Manhattan Bank had a bigger problem than most organizations because Chase's manager in Saigon was Dutch, Cornelis Tormain, and he didn't believe that the American embassy would help him and his family get out in the final hours. And so he announced to the bank that he was leaving. And so the bank was saddled with the responsibility of finding somebody to go in and keep the branch open as long as possible and evacuate the senior Vietnamese staff if necessary. They needed somebody who was preferably young, single, and expendable. And there I was working in, I had just arrived at Chase's Bangkok branch, which is an hour and a half flight. away. They came to me and asked me if I'd do it, and I was immortal, so I said sure. I had worked for American Express in Saigon 4 years earlier, my first job out of college, and I knew I don't claim to speak Vietnamese. I do speak Thai, but I knew a couple hundred words. I knew the lay of the land in central Saigon. I knew the air base, Tan Son Nhut Air Base. I said, sure. What could go wrong? When I got there, I discovered that the North Vietnamese had 40,000 veteran troops 36 miles away. And on the same day, April 15, 1975, I learned that the U.S. ambassador prohibited Chase from evacuating its Vietnamese employees because it was against Vietnamese law for them to leave without exit visas. You know what exit visas are. They're because you know the film Casablanca. Remember the letters of transit that Humphrey Bogart was trying to get? Those are exit visas. That's what everybody in Saigon was trying to lay their hands on, and they were not available at any price. Did I tee it up pretty well?
You did, and I think it's a great story, and I think we have to remember that all this happened 50 years ago next month, April 30th, 1975, so it's very relevant. And if we look at the disaster in Afghanistan, and hopefully we will not have a similar disaster in Ukraine, this is an ongoing problem of maybe the U.S. not pulling these things off very well. And it's a great read. I was up to midnight reading it. My copy is dog-eared because I was up reading it, and partly because my puppy got hold of it, but chewed the corner. But it's a great read, and I really recommend it. And it really goes into someone who breaks the rules and rises to the occasion, which I think is what we have here with Ralph. Now, Ralph, you mentioned the ambassador, Graham Martin, and in your book, there's almost a chapter devoted to your encounter in the men's room at the embassy where he's spitting blood. Apparently he had pneumonia and was not taking the medicine of the day very well. But when he got out on the last chopper, I understand the Marine had orders to formally arrest him, to physically just put him on the chopper and get him off the roof of the embassy and stop playing around. Now the 50 years difference, what's your take on him? Was he kind of losing it mentally, or was he just a believer that couldn't handle the whole thing collapsing around him?
Yeah, there's not much psychology taught at Columbia Business School. So you're listening to an amateur. And amateur psychology is worth what you pay for it. Mm-hmm. The ambassador, a lot of people point out the fact that his adoptive son had been killed in action in Vietnam, and that he didn't want his son to have died in vain. And there's some logic to that. We would all empathize, I think. But when enemy troops start getting closer and closer and closer, and your job is to represent the interests of the United States of America in a foreign country, part of that job is the well-being of the Americans who live there. And the day I arrived, there were 5,000 Americans still living in Vietnam, mostly GIs who had returned, left the service, returned to live with their wives or girlfriends, start families, living in small towns, some in Saigon. He also felt that he didn't want Saigon to slip into the communist orbit on his watch. He didn't want the history books to say that he lost Vietnam. He thought he could keep it running. He thought he could find a solution. He didn't want to give up. He didn't know surrender. He was He was a fighter. I think he was a nut. I think there was something, I think he was emotionally disturbed in some way. I don't think anybody in this room would have refused to lower the flag at the top of the embassy for fear of dispiriting the fighting spirit of our allies. We would have said at some point the war is irretrievably lost, and the best bet is to get Americans out. Ambassador Martin never got to that point. When he was asked subsequently back in the States, in Washington, if he would have done anything differently, his answer was no. I would have done everything just the way I did handle it. The fact is, the reason it wasn't a worse debacle, it was one of the 2 or 3 worst foreign policy disasters in American history, and he did preside over it. In fact, I contend that we would not have the phrase "the fall of Saigon" in our vocabulary if Ambassador Graham Martin had been mentally stable. I think his instability caused that disaster, not Kissinger, not Nixon, the enemy troops, of course, but not President Tew. I attribute the disaster to Graham Martin.
Yeah, and Ralph in the book cites the case of the banyan tree, which was shading the ambassador's limo in the courtyard, and he deliberately refused to have the banyan tree cut down so the choppers could land in the courtyard, which is one reason they landed on the roof, saving the banyan tree. In Ralph, in his book, he had benefited from it. He describes how there were sort of rogue embassy employees who were basically going behind the ambassador's back and setting up channels to get people out, Americans and Vietnamese. There's a wonderful documentary on this phase, which I enjoyed. It's called Last Days in Vietnam, and it came out about a decade ago, by Rory Kennedy, sort of the normal sister of Bobby. And she interviewed helicopter pilots, and it was very dramatic. Helicopters would go from the embassy roof and other rooftops. In fact, that famous picture of the people climbing onto the helicopter was not actually the embassy roof. It was a different safe house. And they'd fly out into the Pacific Ocean, land on a chopper, and the sailors would just push the chopper into the water and wait for the next one to show up. That's the kind of dramatic exodus is going on. The movie, Ralph, highlights the work of Richard Armitage, who doesn't appear in your book at all. Maybe you were just in different spheres. What was your assessment of Armitage, who apparently got out about 5,000 people?
At one point I was more familiar with what Armitage had done. I can't just extemporaneously, I can't identify it, but there was a small cadre of Foreign Service officers who were working behind Graham Martin's back. Before I tell you about that, I just want to reiterate something Jim said in his opening remarks. People who got left behind, senior Vietnamese who had worked for the Americans, were either shot or put in prison camps in the jungle and tortured daily for years and years. I knew the way I met my first Vietnamese. It's another story. I won't do the whole thing. The head of the Vietnamese American Community Association of New Jersey phoned me and he said, "Ralph, my father was caught behind enemy lines, and they imprisoned him, and they tortured him psychologically and physically every day for 7 years. And then they finally let him go, and he got to America." That's the best we could expect for our senior employees. The more likely scenario was that they would be executed. So the people like me, and there were a lot of us trying to get our Vietnamese out. We're up against a rock and a hard spot. Our companies wanted us to get them out. We wanted to get them out, but we just couldn't get them. Commercial aviation had been terminated. No more commercial flights were coming in or out after I'd been there for about a week. Pan Am ceased operations, and so you had to get on an Air Force plane, and you had to be manifested officially, and you couldn't do it. So here's Ralph running around Saigon every day, sort of groveling for help, and getting kicked in the teeth. And I'm 27. I grew up in Litchfield, Connecticut. I don't know one single thing other than accounting, and I don't speak the language. And the ambassador's against me. It looks like the world's against me, and the enemy is getting closer and closer. And so at one point, I wanted to get the radio frequency that the security forces were going to be using in an emergency. That's all I wanted, was the radio frequency, so I could get a shortwave radio and find out where the helicopters were going to be coming in. And so I went to what they call the mission warden's office, and I was sitting there. This is true, not making up a word of this. So I'm sitting there talking to this former captain in the Army, and he's at a desk. He's typing something on a big, heavy computer on his desk. Not computer. They didn't have computers. Typewriter. And his secretary comes in and says his name was Captain White. So, Captain White, can I talk to you? So he goes out, and I'm thinking, wait a minute. Expatriates don't do their own typing around here. What is he doing? And then I noticed he's got an M16 propped up against the wall with a magazine sticking out of it. It's a loaded, and so he's not acting like a civilian, member of the embassy. So I walk around. I looked at the document that he was working on, and it's Vietnamese names on the title of the page is Flight Manifest. So he's getting his Vietnamese out. So he comes back, and I confront him. I say, "You're getting your employees out." I said, "I want to get on that program." He said, "Yeah, you probably could get on it, but I can't tell you how."
Yeah. Well, on a lighter note, as a friend who read the book said, there's some sexy parts, so I quickly whipped through.
Are we going to do the sexy part?
Yeah. Well, I know your girlfriend's in the room here. She doesn't want to hear it. But did you, the famous one is, and I'll pronounce it wrong, Nga. Now, you got her to the States, and I think she lived with your mother in Litchfield and went to college and in mathematics. Did you follow up with her at all? That's kind of a thread that's cut in the story. It doesn't really. What happened to her?
Yeah, it didn't. See, the book had to end somewhere. So, I mean, I call it my 13-day memoir because on that trip, I was in Saigon 13 days. So I terminate the book at that point. Well, I do follow them through refugee camps in the Philippines, Guam, California, and then back to New York. So there's a few more days after that. But I lost track of all of those employees. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have computers. We didn't have email. All we had was physical addresses. And remember, they were refugees. I was working for Chase in Bangkok. They flew me back to Bangkok. I was there 2 years, then Hong Kong another 4 years. Then I was back in New York, and I didn't have any. I tried to reach them. I couldn't find them. And I had just given up. And then the book was coming out, and I had a publication date. My editor at Simon & Schuster called me up and said, "Ralph, are you sitting down? There's a supply chain problem because of COVID. There's going to be almost a 1 year delay in publication of your book. And I was really deflated. And he said, but look, Ralph, find your Vietnamese. It's a different book if you've reconnected with them. And I said, come on, I've done everything. I can't find it. You know, they're all named Win, for one thing. All the women are named Nga. And he said, find them. And I said, okay. You know, Executive Vice President Simon & Schuster tells you to do something, you do it. So I tried. I sent text to Vietnamese community associations that had newsletters. Ralph White's looking for the employees of Chase Saigon. Nothing happened. Years passed, the months passed, and then I got the call from the president of the New Jersey Association, telling me about his father, and he said, well, to thank you for what you did, I want to invite you to our Lunar New Year Gala. And so Gail and I went. She's back there somewhere, bright platinum hair, and we're the only Occidentals in a whole sort of gymnasium. And there's Vietnamese music and Vietnamese food, and they're all in their traditional garb, and I thought, I think I'm going to find Chase Manhattan Bank employees here 40 years later, you know. So I did what you would do. I ordered a beer and sat down, and then I was there for just a minute or so, and a Vietnamese woman in a blue dress, an ao dai, came over and sat down and said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, I know it sounds lame, but I was hoping to connect with the Vietnamese employees of the Chase Manhattan Bank from, you know, the fall of Saigon. They don't say fall of Saigon, they say Black April. So I'm looking for Black April people from Chase Saigon. Oh, do you know a girl named Minya? I said, yeah, you know, she was a senior operations officer. She said, well, here, she's my best friend. You're talking to her. And I'm talking to her, and she says, yeah, and I know how to find this person and this person and this person, and this person's dead and this person's dead. This person got married, and I want to meet you. And we got together, and now I'm in touch with 26 families, and Gail and I are going to go to their 50th anniversary of the fall of Saigon, Black April, next month.
Yeah, there's a nice picture in the book of a reunion. It's lovely. Well, my final thought, and then I'll open up to questions from all of you. You mentioned, Ralph, that it's a 13-day, and each day is a chapter. I may not be alone in this room, but sometimes I can't remember what I did on Tuesday, much less 50 years ago. What were your memory aids for recreating? I mean, did you get old maps? There were no email then. I mean, how did you recreate in great detail 13 days, which comes out about 280 pages?
Well, first of all, I have an average IQ. I take really good notes, and I study well. And I testified at a trial. The Chase Manhattan Bank was sued for closing the branch too early in Saigon, and so I had to testify that I kept it open as long as I could. And in the process, the lawyers filled me in on all the stuff I needed to know about the last days. I have new information from the employees that I brought out.
Did you go back, or have you been back?
You know, it's a funny story. Funny answer. Of all things, my former wife's brother became the ambassador to Vietnam, and we went to visit him before he was ambassador, when he was still the political officer, and we visited. Of course, that was in Hanoi. But we also visited Saigon, and I got a chance to go around and see my old haunts, sitting on the terrace of the Continental Hotel where Somerset Maugham and Graham Greene had drinks, and it's really a fabulous place. If you ever get a chance, I'm sure some of you have been back. In fact, some of you know Saigon better than I do. No, I know Saigon better. You know Ho Chi Minh City better.
It has changed very fast. In the book, you refer to the Beaux-Arts Opera House, and I think when I was there, they were building a subway underneath it, a metro line. So, anyhow, let's open it up to folks in the audience. Some of you, I know Dick Jackson spent time there during the war. Mark's in the back. And Wendy's got the traveling mic. So, open to questions.
I'll try to get the mic first. Okay. So I did read the book. I want to thank you. I thought it was a fascinating read.
Thank you so much.
While I was reading the book, I was reminded that here you are a young guy, just there for a short period of time before you were given this opportunity to help Vietnamese employees come out of Saigon. Would you have done that? Would you have been as adventurous, courageous, ballsy, if you would, if you were older and working for Chase longer?
I think I think ignorance helped me not confront the situation. I just started with Chase. I was awed by the organization. And those are the Rockefeller days. It was the global bank, America's global bank. I loved being a Chase guy. When the headhunters would call me, I'd say, no, don't call me anymore. I'm going to be a Chase guy for the rest of my life. Of course, then one headhunter called and said, Ralph, I'm going to double your salary. And I changed my mind. I think youth played a role in the foolishness and probably played a role too in why I stayed so long, stayed there. I think if I had 20/20 hindsight, if I'd known what I was actually in for, I'd have had the same attitude as the Dutch guy. I'm out of here. I don't want to do it. But if I had left prematurely before the job was done, and my employees had suffered the torture or death, I'd have had a tough time.
And thank you for that. And just a comment. Also, as I was reading the book, I was thinking just a bit of like a Schindler's List, where with your actions getting those staff members out of Saigon to freedom, you were then enabling them to create families in the future. So kudos to you.
Thanks so much. I never had children of my own. And so my adoptive family from Vietnam is the only family I have. So they send me photos and videos of what I consider my grandchildren, great-grandchildren. And I'm as proud of them as any of you are about your kids. It was, I didn't take any particular skill set. I did take one skill, but let me finish up with that. When I pitched this book to my literary agent, and when she pitched it to Simon & Schuster, it was ordinary guy faced with extraordinary circumstances rises to the occasion, and there was nobody more ordinary than I was back then. I was very callow. I was very green, and I would not be the person that you would expect Chase to throw into that situation. I wasn't a commando. I didn't have, astronomical IQ or anything. I did bring one thing. My father was an alcoholic and a drug addict, I learned how to get around him, to do stuff. I had wile and guile. And so when the ambassador said, "Ralph, I'm not going to let you get your people out of here," I'm thinking, good luck. Good luck with that, Graham.
Yeah, good. Ralph uses a word which apparently newcomers in Vietnam were given, turtles. They kind of walk around kind of hunched down, I guess expecting a shell to land any moment. But so you were a turtle.
Yeah, the turtles. The GI. It was GI slang. Somebody new in country they'd all walk around like this, and like a turtle. And then after a while, they'd say, "Didn't get killed yesterday. Probably won't get killed today."
Yeah.
Hi, thank you for doing what you did. I got an email from IWOW and they said that you had adopted the folks in the employees.
Right.
Did you actually do that?
Yes. So here's the story. It's kind of the guts of the book, so it's important to tell. So there was basically, I told you about the incident with the mission warden where I saw Vietnamese names on a flight manifest, which meant I knew they were getting out. And then I knew who was in charge at the embassy because there was only one guy there who really had the skill. He had a Vietnamese wife, for one thing. He was a foreign service. He was Shep Lohman, who was the political officer, the job my brother-in-law had in Hanoi when I went there. He had what the Foreign Service calls 5 Vietnamese. He could speak it and read it like a native, speak it and write it like a native. And he had to get his wife's family out of there, and the ambassador would never let him do that. So he had a way. So I went to him, I confronted him, and he basically told me how to. He pointed me in the right direction. That there was an evacuation control center at Tan Son Nhut Air Base. And so I found the guy who was in charge, interviewed him, and he was also a young guy. He was 33. I was 27. He's still alive. What's his name? Ken Moorfield. He lives in Miami. So I was originally going to fly them out. I had a pilot's license, and I'd flown Cessnas and Pipers, little 2-seat planes, and here I was going to steal a DC-3 and take out 100, poor people. I was pretty sure I could get it off the ground. I don't know if I could navigate to Thailand and land it. That was Plan A. That was Chase Manhattan Bank's Plan A, for Ralph to steal a plane. And so we went out to Tiger Air, which these planes were with Tiger, and the plane was gone. The plane I was going to steal was gone. And so I turned the bus around and went back to what they call the Evacuation Control Center. And it was exclusively for the dependents of American citizens, mainly 99% GIs who married Vietnamese women and started raising families. Salary for an enlisted man goes pretty far in Vietnam, or used to. And I got in line. I said, they had people at the front. What do you want to do? Oh, well, I want to get some Vietnamese on a flight. Well, follow the yellow line on the floor. There was tape on the floor, so I followed the yellow line. There was a vice consul doing marriages and adoptions, and he said, he doesn't even look up. He says, he says, passport. I give him my passport. So what can I do for you, Mr. White? I said, I want to get some Vietnamese out of here. And he says, women and children, wife and child. I said, I'm thinking, yeah, there are wives in my group, there are children in my group. Yeah, wife and children. And he says, how many forms do you need? 1 form per person. I said, well, I took them out in 2 groups, so that's not 113. So I said, 56. He looks up finally and says, you can't support, how old are you? 27. You can't support 56 people. And I I had $20,000 in my satchel in 20s, and then I had David Rockefeller looking out after me back in New York. I said, yeah, I can support him. And he grabbed a bunch of forms, gave them to me. I went out into the hot sun and filled it out. It took me an hour to fill out the forms. Came back in, and he said, make sure they come back to me. And he said, must be a very interesting story. I said, yeah. And so I actually legally adopted them. And I legally adopted the other group, so in total, 113. I was 27, and I had an adoptive family of 113.
And then, Ralph, just a quick one interjection. In the book, you cite a friend of yours, I guess American, who, if you had an American husband, you could get out. And so he was sort of trolling some square, and these women in their 30s would pay him $25,000 to get married. And he'd do 3 marriages in a day. So he was really...
Yeah, I knew one guy who got married 5 times in a day. And it was... he would only take gold, and it was $15,000 in gold. So he had a pretty good payday for a few days, and then after I left, 24 hours, a little more than 24 hours, maybe 30 hours after I left, the runways at Tan Son Nhut Air Base were bombed by a friendly troop, not the North Vietnamese, by friendly troops. So that basically the pilot was saying, if I can't get out, nobody's getting out. And that's why we have all these iconic photos of helicopters off of roofs. It's because the runways at the airbase were bombed.
Yeah.
I would like to tell you a quick story about the cover photo. This is the cover photo that ended up on the book. Because this is out of science fiction. I'm gonna tell you a story, and you're not gonna believe it. So you heard about the delay. I told you about the delay. So the book comes out, and I'm riding high. My first big boy book is out. My friends are all congratulating me. People I haven't seen for years are calling me up, and I'm signing books and having a great old time. And then I get my phone rings, and it's, you know how there's a caller ID. It says Houston, Texas. And I don't know about you, but I don't answer the phone when you don't know who it is, especially Houston, Texas. The only person I know there is an old drinking buddy, and I don't want to talk to him. And but then I remember there are a lot of Vietnamese in Houston. So reluctantly, hello, Ralph White. And the voice said, hello, Mr. White. My name, Nguyen Tinh Ya. You take me out Saigon, Black April. I work Chase Saigon. I thank you. And I said, wow, that's so nice of you to call me. How'd you find me? Oh, she said she had the grapevine. She knew how to get me. And then she said, oh, I didn't tell you the great part. I've got to back up. I don't do this very often. When you're a first-time author at Simon & Schuster, you don't get any say in anything. The book, you don't get, like for the cover photo, that's out of your hands. But for some reason, they decided to give me some say. They showed me a cover. It was not this cover, but it was a C-130 flying into the sunset, big red sun, pine trees on the horizon. It was a really nice photo, bright, colorful. And I said, sure, yeah, go ahead. They were going to use it anyway. And then a couple weeks later, I got a call, and my editor said, the sales department dinged your photo, or dinged the cover, because if the book is about refugees, we want refugees on the cover. If it were about airplanes, then you could have an airplane on the cover. So, Ralph, do you have any pictures of Vietnamese refugees? And I did not. So I did what you would do. I went on my computer, I put in Getty Images, and I clicked Saigon, Fall of Saigon, Vietnamese refugees. And boom, I got about 800 hits. And I'm scrolling through these grainy black and white photos and helicopters that I didn't have anything to do with helicopters. And then I see this photo that with little kids walking up the ramp onto an Air Force cargo plane, and it's crisp, a nice crisp photo, and it had some area at the top where the title of the book might go, and I said, yeah, use that. Sent it in. They said, yeah, we can use that. They mocked it up. They showed me. I approved it. It goes to market. So then it gets published. So then, like a couple months after it comes out, hello, my name is Winting Yang, Houston, Texas. And thank you for taking me out, da, da, da. And then she says, and thank you for putting my children on the cover of your book. Who's this? My name is Winting Yang. You remember me. I did not remember her. She said, yeah, I lost my luggage, and you took me to the PX, and you bought me a dress and a toothbrush. And I remember I did that. And I said, wow, that's amazing. And you're sure these are your kids? I know my kids. So anyway, I talked to her. She said, now, yeah, that's my Vien and my An. Now, you talk to Vien, and I'm talking to this 3-inch high kid, that I finally put a name behind him. And so think about it, between when I was in Saigon, and I talked to, the mission warden was pulled out of his office, and I saw the Vietnamese names on the manifest. What are the chances that I would be there at that moment, and the secretary takes him out, I see the gun, I walk around. What are the chances that I would discover that there was this clandestine channel to get civilians out on Air Force planes? And then what are the chances that this would happen? It's I'm not a very spiritual person, but it's hard not to look at this and not see the hand of God. I was lucky. Luck played the biggest part. If you add up all the factors, I would say luck played a huge role. I was blessed to be selected for the mission. I was blessed that it succeeded, and I feel blessed to be here telling the story today. Thank you.
Want to take some more questions? Or?
Yeah, if there are any more questions, I didn't mean to end with an exclamation point.
Here.
I'm halfway through the book and I'm blown away. How did you have the nerve in the bathroom with the ambassador growing up to carry on with him when you did? I was like, it was so ballsy, as the other gentleman said. And you, as I recall, you hadn't even met him yet. That was the first
face-to-face. Yeah, the scene. The scene is. I was in the embassy almost every day. I could walk up and down the offices on the third floor, and I basically knew everybody in every office. I covered the embassy like a wetsuit. And the reason they were all on the third floor is, I don't know if you've all seen photos of the embassy in Saigon. It's like 5 floors. The first floor is empty. It's basically a carport. The Marines are on the first. There are some functionaries second. Third floor was where all the senior ambassador, foreign service officers were. Top floor was actually the CIA. And then the helicopter pad was on the roof. Why were all the people on the third floor? Because infantry attacks from the ground level and rockets come in from above. They figured the safest place to put the senior people was the third floor. The ambassador had stiff-armed me a couple of times, and and I had not met him. I had been dealing with the deputy chief of mission, Wolfgang Lehman, principally, who was basically the strong-arm guy for the ambassador, deputy chief of mission. And so when I finally did see him, when I finally did have the opportunity to see him face to face, he's coughing up blood and spitting into the sink, and yeah, I was a little rough on him, I will say. What did I have to lose? I was, again, I'm not a psychologist, but I felt, in the book I used the word psychotic, that I thought he was psychotic. It turns out that's really not the right word. I should have done my homework. He was mentally disturbed in some way, emotionally disturbed, but a psychotic wouldn't be able to manage a branch, manage an embassy. But yeah, I asked him what the hell he was thinking, and why. I said I was going to get my people out, and he could help or he could oppose it, but I was getting him out. Anybody else? Got time? Thank you.
There. The photo credit isn't in the book.
Thank you so much for coming. And in hearing the story, I have to imagine that it was extremely traumatic in some way for you and all of the families that you changed their lives forever by coming here, and that fear that they must have felt and not knowing if they were going to be able to get out or not. And I'm wondering for you, in coming back to the U.S., what your relationship was with the anger that you alluded to a little bit for the, against Graham for putting everyone in this position in the first place, maybe against the U.S. for creating a situation in which, all of their citizens weren't readily evacuated in time and were put in this position of, wondering if they were going to be able to get out. And yeah, I guess wanting to know a little bit more about the emotions that you felt towards the country when you came back.
Thank you. I've done quite a bit of reading. As you might imagine, I've done quite a bit of reading about those days, the fall of Saigon. And I felt vindicated to see in, I would say, a half a dozen of the reference books that I read, including David Butler's The Fall of Saigon, which I think is the best book out there on it, nonfiction book. And there are half a dozen of them refer to Graham Martin's mental imbalance, mental incapacities. So I felt vindicated that that's the conclusion I came to. At the time, in my youth, and when I was 27, I didn't have a kind of globalist view. I grew up in a town of 6,000 people. There were 65 kids in my graduating class. I flunked out of my first college. I went to a community college. I finally graduated towards the bottom of my class at the University of Maryland. I was lucky to get a job at all. And yeah, boom, I'm working in Vietnam all of a sudden. Well, the people who scored well in the tests are working in London and Paris. And here at the bottom of my class, yeah, we got a job for you, Ralph. It's in Saigon. So I wasn't attuned. I wasn't a foreign policy guru. So I wasn't able to put it in the kind of context that Jim might be able to, for instance. I felt like a ping pong ball, like a what do you call those games? Yeah.
Pinball.
Yeah, pinball machine. I felt like a pinball, boom, boom, boom. Somebody on the third floor would kick me in the back, and another would kick me in the front, and I'd sort of, ricochet out to Tan Son Nhut Air Base, back to the bank, and So I wasn't really able to put it. What I will say is something I've formulated fairly recently, and I've mentioned, Jim and I have talked about this. You know, we live in a representative democracy. We usually get the government we ask for. And the government usually is eventually accountable to the electorate. The American people wanted out of that war. 58,000 men had been killed. And so for people who like I have high regard for Frank Snepp, who wrote Decent Interval and who was Martin's security chief in the CIA. But he faults Kissinger for getting us out too early. My response is, if 58,000 dead American boys isn't enough, how many is enough? When do you draw the line? You know, maybe you get to 68,000 dead, and is it time to get out now? So at some point you have to pull the plug, and that's not a pretty sight. It wasn't a pretty sight in Afghanistan. There were in Vietnam two GIs were killed in the final hours. In Afghanistan it was 13. It's the price we paid for getting out.
A quick follow-up. You hint in the book that the North Vietnamese general may have held off about 25 miles north of town for about 10 days to give the Americans time to vamoose. Do you think that's a fair reading of history?
Yes, I think so. Again, it wasn't my feeling at the time. I wasn't privy to the General Jung's, the senior North Vietnamese general's views, but the Politburo, the Communist Politburo in Hanoi had passed a resolution shortly after I arrived in the 14th, not because I arrived, about the 14th or so, that any Americans who wanted to leave could leave, that they wouldn't fire at the planes, for instance. But Martin said, well, Americans aren't leaving. We're not taking our people out. The war's not over. We're still going to stay here. So I think that's what caused the foreign policy debacle was, we've talked about this before. What could Martin have done differently? Well, the big thing he could have done was there were 5 consulates in Vietnam strung up and down the country. He could have closed the consulates and brought all of those staffers in, brought in all the GIs who were hanging out because the consulate was open. Sounds like we're almost at the end of our time here. I think I didn't feel as though I was participating in American foreign policy. I did feel I was a witness to history. I will say that. I did understand that about what was happening. It didn't occur to me that I would write a book that would come out 45 years later that would put a nail in the coffin of my ambassador. No.
Good job.
Oh, thank you very much.